so persuasion, right? And so you need the charismatic politician. Perhaps you whisper, as an economist, whisper into their ears, or you give them a blueprint, and, as you have contributed to the alternative economic projects of the past, right? When there were earlier iterations of the Pakatan Harapan government or Pakatan Rakyat government and so on. So the Barisan Alternative, I think, was something that you contributed to. So for me, and I'm going to open this up to all of you soon, is we're at a point in our history where we assume that the breakthrough we had politically last year would inaugurate a whole range of possibilities, economic, social, political, cultural. We see the world in a different way. Now, a year and a half into this new world, there's an exhaustion. There's an exhaustion, there's a cynicism. How do you think we can start to, I mean, and personally, where do you see this all going? I mean, are there scenarios that you're building in your own mind about the way in which we can shape this current, kind of paralysis, I think, that almost in the way that we're moving or not moving forward?
We'll run into the problem of the proverbial Indian elephant and the 6 blind men touching different parts of the elephant and concluding different things about the elephant. So I'm not so sure it's that it's the best use of our time to start speculating on possible scenarios. I do think, however, that one has to begin to recognize 2 things. Number one, the poverty of thought. The poverty of thought, the fact that the ethno-populist discourse has been so dominant and so insidious in our society that, in a sense, we have not been able, socially speaking, to think beyond that. And so often you can, even the certain ideas, ostensibly meritocratic ideas, actually are a thin veneer for an underlying ethno-populist discourse or an alternative kind of thing. So it is extremely difficult. But I think what we need to begin to recognize is that there is a tremendous need for a popular education. That as issues come up, we need to begin to pose things differently. So, for example, the question of the subsidy for petrol subsidy, who deserves to get it, and so on and so forth. And, perhaps we should be thinking about strengthening public transportation rather than thinking in terms of subsidies for individuals. Now, this, of course, flies in the face of trying to promote the car, our car purchases. And Malaysia has one of the highest levels of car ownership in the world. Okay, admittedly, Peroduas, Myvis, and, relatively small vehicles which are under 1 liter. But still, and we don't even begin to think of a post-petroleum world in a fairly serious fashion. Europe decided in 2006 to go to biodiesel. And we are still, struggling in this country about whether it's going to be more than 5% biodiesel in our diesel. We are captured. We are captured, and the ghosts of the past, of past ideas, haunt us and infiltrate our discourse in ways which we don't even begin to appreciate.
And at that point, I think, maybe we can talk a little bit more politically about the leadership of this country, because the paradox of our great breakthrough was to return a man that ran this country for 22 years back into power. So, it is deeply ironic that the change is signaled by leadership that is actually from the past. And I wonder, and I know recently Zaid Ibrahim, and it was a politician, a local politician, said, we need new leadership. And he's placing the onus of the paralysis, or the problem of paralysis, locating it in the person of Dr. Mahathir. And then, of course, with the presumption that things will change if leadership at Putrajaya federal level changes. What's your thinking about it? Are there really different ways of thinking within government? I mean, could a change in leadership mean a new economic direction, or at least a more coherent approach to economic issues that we have?
That's a tricky question to answer. The tendency among most of us is to say, oh, it is Bersatu, the party, these UMNO people who have defected from UMNO, who basically are the embodiment of the old ideas. I would suggest the problem is far more widespread than that. that the whole discourse in our society has been so much influenced by what has happened in the last 90 years, but especially what has happened in the period since the introduction, since May 69. So the last 50 years has been so defining that it's not just us, but also our parents and our children and our grandparents sometimes who think in those terms and cannot think outside of that. And then we have a tough time trying to understand how come Sabahans and Sarawakians see the world differently from us. You know, maybe they're not Malaysian enough. Maybe it's the problem of, you know, they're not getting enough exposure to RTM or things like that. You know, and you know, we are unable to think more broadly, more creatively, and more critically as a consequence outside of the box.
Right. In fact, if we want perhaps one formula to break the federation would be to force people to watch RTM all day long. I mean, that could be, in fact, the end of Malaysia. I say tentatively. Okay, now we have about 20 minutes, and I thought we'd open it up and see where your concerns are. I beg you to be very brief, ask the question, let Jomo have his time to, you know, to theorize and to make comments. So if I could just take questions, if you could just, the mics on just put up your hand. We'll take 2 questions first to just see where the room wants to go in terms of this conversation. Identify yourself, you know, first name's fine, and then ask your question. Any questions? There's a question in the back there from the young gentleman in the t-shirt. Yeah, you can see it. Just keep putting up your hand until the mic person sees you, and then just put up your hand again. There she sees you. Okay, thanks. So, Asia Europe Institute, no?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Angin. I'm from the Asia Europe Institute. My question is basically, you were talking about ethnopolitic discourse and how the racial discourse is, over the past 90 years, is now gaining full steam in the online dimension, and you see a lot of hate speech online and a lot of this kind of racialized discourse. How would you say we can contend with this new dimension, this new warfare that's happening online?
Okay. Is there another question we could take to see? Okay, Cam?
Yes, my question is very basic. And I'm wondering, is economics a science, in your opinion? And has your views evolved as you've grown older and lived in this world of economics, whether it's a science or an art or just a mystery?
I think Rebecca threw the gauntlet down when she said the problem with the Chinese Communist Party was they were using economics that was essentially about capitalism to build socialism, and it was ever going to work, perhaps. But let's take those questions. Would you like to start either the question of hate speech or the question of your sense of the enterprise of economics?
Cam also looks older, so I didn't recognize him for a moment. But
we're all aging, because you know, you're not aging, you're dead, I think I say.
That's true. I think, you know, the Arab word for knowledge is ilm. Okay, so you know, there are all kinds of knowledges, and to privilege some knowledge as science and some knowledge as non-science is something a Popperian conceit, if you will. And I don't really. I think policy making is certainly involves a great deal of art, but to say that there's nothing to be said for rigorous analysis, it risks throwing out the scientific pretensions with the bathwater. So I think it's a very delicate thing. So I would say that different types of knowledges, where does the transition from alchemy to chemistry begin? Or what is the line, you know? What is the line between metaphysics and physics? You know, it's not a very easy question to answer. So likewise, I would say, what is the line between, say, physiocracy, which is school of economics, in early school of economics in the French agrarian society? You know, when does it become science? And as Rebecca Carl reminded us earlier, you know, is there a different economics for understanding non-capitalist societies? And if we look at what is happening in economics, there is a great deal of contestation, and a lot of the contestation is quite quite important. So, for example, the last set of Nobel Prizes has been awarded to 3 people for what is called experimental economics. You know, and does it, you know, is that akin to scientific experimentation? So there are a lot of pretensions, the scientific pretensions about economics and by economists, which I'm very, very wary of. But at the same time, I think we can't say that there is nothing to economics except intuition, because it risks throwing out the rigor.
I do want to ask you, before you get to that question, just to follow up on Cam, which is the idea of not just economics, but also kind of policy making, right? To what extent do you think the institutions of policy making, the process of policy making in Malaysia today or in the last decades, plus just this idea of unintended consequences that, you know, often policymakers don't seem to be looking at those possibilities, the things that weren't intended, not the objectives of the policy, might actually become a thing to contend with.
Well, unintended consequences are a problem in science as well. You can have an innovation which deals with a problem, but you may not fully anticipate all its effects. I think Cam's question, I suspect, doesn't come from the Kuhnian tradition, but rather more a Popperian kind of question about what is science and what is, you know, if economics can be falsifiable, and you know, those kinds of questions.
Karl Popper,
Yeah.
Thomas Good, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
So the question behind, from the back of the room, yeah.
On hate speech, I think it's very, very difficult to deal with hate speech. I don't have any simple answers, but I think the more fundamental challenge for Malaysian society is to have a deeper and broader and more inclusive understanding of the society, and how do we promote that? How do we promote that, for example, in television programming? How do we promote that, for example, in the writing of comic books, and in history books, and so on and so forth? So you refer to a very specific problem, which is the anarchy or the libertarian claims of the internet. But I think we all know, you know, whether you believe the Democratic Party in its moment of loss to Trump, that it was all the Soviets, the Russians who did it. You know, the thing is, I think I think enough people are now skeptical about about the internet, and I think we need to promote greater skepticism, and so I'm very keen on that. For example, I was recently confronted with a piece of fake news, and I said that I'm now at a literary festival where we call this fiction, and you know, and so, you know, I do think but I think it is trying to wag the dog by focusing on the tail. If you think about it in terms of what we do about the internet, there's not going to be any serious contestation if we don't have a fulsome understanding of our society. And let's face it, that is not exactly encouraged either by the media, by schooling, by socialization more generally. So we have a huge task ahead of us, and this I think is a very important challenge for us.
Right. There's